The Fujifilm X-T4 was a surprise in that it was announced just 18 months after its predecessor, which is pretty quick for the digital imaging industry. It wouldn't ship for another 2 months, but it still begs the question, why? Why did the team at Fujifilm feel the need to release the successor to their flagship product so soon? And more importantly, is this a considerable upgrade? After months of testing this camera, from pre-production to the final unit that I purchased for myself, there are some themes that really stand out. And among them is this idea of the perfect camera. In this review, I'm going to tackle that subject and see if this camera falls under that umbrella. Let's get this started. As a Fuji shooter, picking up an X-T4 feels instantly familiar yet evolutionary. The analog styling continues to be the defining aesthetic for this series of camera, where the dials really provide this tangible way to control how you capture an image. What's interesting about the X-T4, however, is the collection of refinements that were made to make for a more comfortable shooting experience. The grip is more pronounced, the viewfinder moves further from the back of the camera, and the two command dials have a smoother flow to them. This all leads to a better feel in the hands. This camera incorporates that DSLR shape that has defined the pro imaging space, but it doesn't feel intimidating. And listen, this is just where the conversation begins. The Fujifilm X-T4 features the oh-so-capable 4th generation X-Trans sensor and builds around it with a new focal plane shutter that promises to be twice as durable and 30% quieter. While it's not as quiet as the Fuji X100V with its leaf shutter, this one is still pretty damn quiet. In most of my shooting environments, my subject wasn't even aware that I was taking the picture, and that's something worth talking about. I never got the feeling that this shutter was loud, not in any of my shooting environments, and this new mechanism allows for a continuous burst rate of 15 frames per second in mechanical mode, which is pretty staggering. Further, this is only the second camera from Fujifilm to feature in-body image stabilization, IBIS, the first one being the X-H1. And this system, it's newer, it runs off magnetic springs, so it's lighter, it's smaller, and it works pretty well. I could get as low as 1/4 of a second and still get sharp, usable images. Stretching it to a full second will lead to varying results. According to Fujifilm, you can pair this with most lenses and get up to 6.5 stops of stabilization. In practice, it feels pretty close to that measurement, but with respect to photography, I think Olympus has the stabilization game locked down, and if we're talking about video, I think Panasonic edges them out. Really, there is a little bit of infancy around this stabilization system, so I'd like to see where this goes. There were several times where I was doing intentional camera movements and you can see the sensor jumping to catch up. However, I think much of this gap can be closed through firmware updates, something that Fuji is very familiar with. I'll get to the video side in a moment, but there's still a few more things to cover. The X-T4 has new boost mode, so you can go in and switch the settings depending on what type of shooting environment you're in. So you can prioritize autofocus, for example, and catch focus as fast as 0.02 seconds, or you can throw it into an economy mode to extend battery life. And on the topic of battery life, Fujifilm has gone and done something that I have been asking for since the inception of this YouTube channel. Yes, they went ahead and threw in a new, bigger battery. And in my testing, it proved to be significantly better than the X-T3, outlasting it in almost every measure. I'll be honest, I did not think that this day would come, let alone so soon, but it looks like the team at Fuji looked at the opportunities for the X-T3 and addressed nearly every single one of them. Before I continue, I want to make a special announcement. The purpose of this channel is creativity shared. The goal is to share as much of my information as possible and hopefully empower you guys to go out and create for yourselves. And in that, you'll find fulfillment. Whether it's sharing photography techniques or improving your editing skills or just providing information for you guys to make a better purchasing decision, the goal of this channel is really to give as much value as you can. And you guys have given me so much value through your views, your likes, your shares, and support over the last 2 years. For those of you that are interested in furthering your support, if you so do wish to, I will say I do have a print shop that's open now. This print shop is where I'll be curating my most favorite images, the ones that are really near and dear to my heart. Each picture is printed, signed, and numbered by yours truly, and it's the most personal thing that I've ever produced. So for those of you that are interested, there's a link in the description and check it out. Let me know what you think. If you're looking to further your support and get some dope art, some unique pieces for your home, I would truly, truly appreciate it. Now, back to the review. This camera is especially for those that are looking to create a fantastic moment in camera as much as possible. The color science along with the Fujifilm simulations are still regarded as some of the best in the business. Acros, for example, is the black and white film simulation that just gives a rendering that's really special. And beyond this, because of the unique sensor, noise, it has a unique feel to it. It has texture. It doesn't feel patterned and obtrusive as you'd see in many other cameras. This all culminates into Fuji tones, as users like to call it, and there's a high degree of customization here. And I will say, if you're interested in the recipes that I use for the images that I capture, I made a video on this, and again, I'll leave a link in the description. Among the image stabilization, another major change is the shift to a fully articulating display. The new higher resolution LCD can be flipped out, rotated, and even flipped back on itself. It may not be for everyone, but I would argue that it will please more people than not, especially if you plan on vlogging on the go. And if you do plan on vlogging, keep in mind that flipping out the screen and using an external microphone, well, that's gonna obstruct the LCD a little bit as the port sticks out a little bit from the camera. The metering subdial has been replaced by a still movie switch, something that may bother some people, but will overwhelmingly benefit most. With a quick flick, you can drop into movie mode, which will in turn change your menu settings and quick menu options to reflect your setup dedicated to video capture. Further to this, you can customize the X-T4 to disregard the aperture, ISO, and shutter speed dial in movie mode, so it only responds to the command dials. And this is a huge benefit for video shooters because this means you can have dedicated settings for photo, and when you switch to movie mode, it will ignore those settings and have its own set of options for video mode, making that switch between photo and video much smoother, much more seamless. This is a huge improvement that makes that hybrid workflow a much better experience. Now, let's talk more about video capture. You can shoot up to 4K at 60p at a pretty high bitrate, and if you include an external monitor, you can take that bitrate even further. At 1080p, you can now go as high as 240 frames per second, but it should be noted that this will be slightly less quality than 120 frames per second. Depending on the settings that you're using, there may be a little bit of a crop on your video capture, as high as 30% if you're using the digital stabilization. But what you can do is take the guesswork out by setting a fixed crop of 1.29 across all modes. And this just allows you to remove the guesswork when you're shooting video. If that wasn't enough, you can now preview your exposure when shooting in F-Log mode. You can also hot swap SD cards for longer recordings, and you can even record video to both cards at the same time. When it comes to video functionality, the X-T4 offers more than enough for enthusiast videographers, and there's even enough here for serious filmmakers. So with all of this to offer, what are the areas of improvement for the Fuji X-T4? In my time with this camera, there aren't many glaring issues. The I/O ports now have a flap that isn't removable, and there's no more headphone jack, which means you'll have to use the USB-C adapter to monitor your audio, which also means that you won't be able to supply power and monitor audio at the same time unless you have the optional battery grip attached, something that may be a pain point for some people. And low-angle videography and photography is a bit more tricky as they moved away from their previous tilting LCD. If you're asking me personally, yes, these are all steps in the wrong direction. But is it a deal breaker? I don't believe so. That being said, I think there's a few other things that Fuji can actually improve during the lifespan of this camera. As I talked about previously, I'd like to see improvements to the image stabilization so it isn't as twitchy when you're doing intentional camera movements. I'd also like to see the option to assign one of the back buttons to a record functionality so I don't have to reach over and hit the shutter button every single time I want to start recording video. And while the autofocus is really good and works quite reliably, the gap between this system and the ones you'd find on modern Sony and Canon cameras is still pretty noticeable. While Fuji may satisfy many users with what they have now, I'd still like to challenge them to become a market leader in autofocus. There are a few more features I'd like to see, but to be honest, they may be better suited for an XH2 style camera, a more premium video-centric solution. One would be to mimic the Panasonic S1H and have both a tilting and articulating display, as well as a few more record buttons around the camera. Another would be to move to a sensor with significantly better dynamic range and much more of a jump in low light performance. And if I'm being honest, include that headphone jack. Stop playing around, Fuji, we want that back. Again, I don't see any of these being the primary focus for even an X-T5. I really think that these are things that would be better suited for a more premium XH2 and ultimately warrant the price. How does the Fujifilm X-T4 compare against the market and even against its predecessor? Well, I'd argue that this camera will not take a better picture than a Fujifilm X-T3, but the advancements may give you more opportunities and make for a better experience. Being able to focus in environments as low as -6 EV and shoot at lower shutter speeds and use up to 3 batteries with the new grip, well, this camera will allow you to shoot longer and in more environments. In short, the X-T3 may be the better option for most people in the market, but there is enough here to warrant the price difference for an X-T4, especially if you plan on capturing a good amount of video. On the topic of price, the X-T4 comes in at $1,700 US, putting it within striking distance of the Nikon Z6, the Canon EOS R, and the Sony a7 III. Now, there are advantages to shooting full frame, but that shouldn't be the only deciding factor. In my opinion, the X-T4 has a much more robust suite of features, and the lens, the rich lens collection, well, it's just nicer to use. They pair nicely with their bodies, and they don't overpower the camera when you mount them. If you're wondering which camera is right for you, specify what you're looking to capture and work backwards from there. Go with your gut and don't look back. When people begin to define their perfect camera, it quickly becomes a list of specs on a page, especially if you're an internet critic. But really, I'd argue what we're looking for is a feeling, this perfect camera for us, this metal and glass extension of our creativity. What impresses me most about the X-T4 is how much potential Fujifilm has implemented into it, such as, and wait for it, much more responsive object tracking, classic negative and Eterna bleach bypass film simulations, monochromatic color options, a multi-exposure mode, HDR plus raw capture, improvements in auto white balance, in-camera TIFF options, autofocus range limiter, controlling grain size and strength, the battery age menu, and an update to the quick menu interface. There is so much here that builds from the X-T3 that it feels like Fujifilm took their hottest product and asked, how can we make this perfect? And there is just something so admirable about that, and to do it on an expedited timeline that you just don't see in the industry. And while that may be because Fujifilm wants more distance between this camera release and the unofficially announced XH2, you still have to respect the hustle. The Fujifilm X-T4 is not a revolutionary product, it's an evolution. It seems like the design team looked at every opportunity for improvement from the X-T3 and, well, damn near addressed every single one of them. This company took an already fantastic product and looked to improve it even further, something that is by no means easy to accomplish. And while it's unfortunate that this camera is released during a time where most people can't go out and capture as much as they want to, there's still so much value packed in here that it's going to be widely recommended for months and months to come, and rightfully so. The X-T4 is that all-around camera that does so many things really well while being a joy to use, and therein lies the unique trait of many Fujifilm cameras, this marriage between powerful features and classic design. It's something that I can use to capture an epic portrait or shoot impactful video and still find joy throughout that process. The Fujifilm X-T4 is a feature-rich camera with purposeful design, and it is nearly perfect in execution. And for many creators on the market, well, this is as close to perfect as you're gonna get. Thank you so much for watching my review of the Fujifilm X-T4. Before you go, I'd love to hear what you think, so leave your thoughts in the comments below and let's continue the conversation there. As always, thank you for watching. My name's Gajan, and I'll see you next time.